The ground beneath a medieval Bavarian village feels solid. It has the particular, reassuring firmness of earth that has been walked on for 1,000 years, compacted by generations of feet, by cartwheels, by the slow weight of buildings that have stood since before anyone living can remember. You walk across a farmyard, or a churchyard, or a field at the edge of a town that appears on maps dating back to the 12th century, and the ground gives you nothing. No tremor, no resonance, no indication whatsoever that the soil beneath your boots is not continuous all the way down to bedrock. And then someone drives a fence post, and the earth gives way. Or a foundation is dug for a new outbuilding, and the excavator drops into nothing. Or a farmer notices that rainwater is vanishing into a depression that has no natural explanation. And there, beneath the topsoil, beneath the root systems of whatever has been growing there for centuries, a dark opening appears. Low, narrow, hand-carved, leading downward into the kind of darkness that has no bottom you can see from where you are standing. This is how most Erdstalls are found. It's not through deliberate archaeological survey, not through historical documents pointing to their locations, through accident, through the ordinary disruptions of rural life, through the ground deciding, after keeping it secret for 800 years, that it is finally willing to be known. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, Echoes of Forgotten Lore. In our last journey, we stood in the wide-open expanse of the Mississippi River Valley, looking at massive earthen mounds that marked the footprint of a vanished American empire. We looked at how an entire civilization of tens of thousands of people could build a metropolis peer to medieval London, only to unwind, abandon their monuments, and dissolve entirely back into the soil, without leaving a single written word behind. But beneath the fields of Europe, the mystery of the land takes a different, more claustrophobic turn. Because here the ancient silence does not sit out in the open under an enormous sky. It is buried directly beneath the feet of modern towns and villages, hidden inside a massive network of narrow, hand-carved stone passages that historical records completely forgot to mention. The word Erdstall is German, and it resists elegant translation. Earthstall approximates it, though it lacks the tunnel's peculiar quality. Subterranean passage is technically accurate, but emotionally inert. What the word describes once seen challenges our existing vocabulary. These are not catacombs. It's not the grand vaulted corridors of Rome or Paris lined with bones, wide enough for a procession. Nor are they medieval cellars, cut square and purposeful beneath the foundations of houses and churches. They are something else entirely, a human-made space most people lack a prior mental image for. The tunnels are rarely taller than a meter, some considerably shorter. An average person cannot stand or crouch comfortably. Movement requires a posture between crawling and a bent shuffle. The ceiling presses close overhead, walls on either side. The darkness ahead reveals almost nothing about what comes next. The passages wind through bedrock in ways that serve no obvious directional logic. They don't go from point A to point B. They curve, descend, turn back on themselves, branch, and reconnect in patterns, suggesting wandering, not efficient navigation. More precisely, it's like the deliberate construction of a space not meant to be navigated efficiently. Several interconnected chambers sometimes open up along a tunnel's length, just large enough to sit in, not large enough to stand. These chambers have no particular relationship to the surface structures above them. Then there are the Schlup. The word means roughly, slip through, and the name is accurate in the most clinical possible sense. The way that calling a locked iron door a barrier is accurate. A schlup is a constriction in the tunnel, a bottleneck cut into the rock that narrows the passage. It's a hole barely large enough for a human body to pass through. Not walk through, not crawl through. You squeeze through, flat on your stomach, arms extended, turning your head sideways, exhaling to reduce your chest, pushing forward through an opening with perhaps 2 centimeters of clearance. They are not accidental, not collapses, nor sections where the tunnel deteriorated and narrowed over time. They are carved with the same evident intention and craft as the rest of the structure. Someone made these precisely this size at deliberate intervals along the passage, for reasons that nobody has yet been able to establish with any confidence. Once through a schlup, you emerge into the next section of tunnel, or a small chamber. Behind you, the opening is barely visible. Ahead, the passage continues. The ceiling is still low. The silence is absolute. The particular silence of underground spaces. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of a different kind of quiet from inside the stone itself. What makes the Erdstalls extraordinary is not their physical design, remarkable as that is. What makes them extraordinary is the silence that surrounds them in the historical record. There are, as of the most recent survey work, over 2,000 documented Erdstalls across Europe. They are concentrated most heavily in Bavaria and Upper Austria, with significant clusters in France. Scattered examples reach into Ireland, Scotland, Hungary, and Spain. The majority have been dated through analysis of pottery fragments and stratigraphy to the medieval period. It's roughly 1000 to 1300 AD. These are the same centuries that produced Gothic cathedrals, Crusades, the Doomsday Book, and the Song of Roland. The medieval period was not a time of sparse records. It was a time of chronicles, monastic histories, and legal documents. Records tracked church construction, planting of orchards, and property disputes down to individual fence posts. Yet not one of those documents mentions an Erdstall. No construction record, no warning, no prohibition, no rumor, no reference to digging underground passages. Not a single landowner's account noted a tunnel of unusual character on their property. No church record flagged subterranean structures connected to irregular practices. Over 2,000 tunnels, dug across multiple countries for 3 centuries. Yet the voluminous and meticulous written record of the Middle Ages has nothing to say about any of them. There are 2 possible explanations for this, and neither one is comfortable. Either the tunnels were dug in absolute secrecy, by people who understood that what they were doing was something the official record should not contain. This implies a level of organized concealment across multiple countries and generations that is itself deeply puzzling. Or the tunnels were so thoroughly understood by the people who made and used them that there was simply nothing to write down. They were part of a common language of practice that everyone already knew, that required no documentation. And that language has since been lost so completely that we cannot recover even a fragment of it from any text that has survived. Both possibilities point to the same unsettling conclusion: that medieval European society contained entire dimensions of practice and belief, that the official record, ecclesiastical, legal, literary, either could not see or could not bring itself to name. The practical explanations have been tried, and they do not hold. Mining is the first and most intuitive guess. People dig underground for resources. The problem is that Erdstalls contain no evidence of mineral extraction, no ore seams that were being followed, no tool marks consistent with the removal of material for any purpose other than the creation of the passage itself, no waste deposits of the kind that mining operations of any scale inevitably produce. The tunnels were not following anything useful through the rock. They were simply being made for their own sake. The hiding place theory is more persistent, and on first consideration, it has a certain logic. Medieval Europe was not a peaceful place. Viking raids, armed conflict between local lords, bands of brigands operating along rural roads. There was genuine reason for a farming family to want a concealed refuge. But the Erdstall's design defeats this purpose so thoroughly that it is difficult to imagine anyone with actual experience of being pursued taking shelter in one. The tunnels are, in most cases, dead ends. There is no second exit, no escape route, no way out once you are inside, except the way you came in. The Schlup, those tight constrictions that make passage difficult, even for a single determined person moving carefully, would become death traps in any scenario involving pursuit, panic, or the need to move quickly. And perhaps most decisively, an enemy who discovered the entrance and lit a fire at the mouth of the tunnel would not need to follow the occupants inside. The smoke would do the work for them. The Erdstall as a hiding place is worse than no hiding place at all. Storage fails for related reasons. The tunnels maintain high humidity, hovering around 90% relative humidity. This humidity would destroy grain, spoil preserved foods, and damage almost any organic material stored there within a short time. And the Schlup renders the transport of any significant quantity of goods physically impossible. You cannot move barrels, sacks, or crates through an opening that requires a human body to exhale and squeeze. Each practical explanation, when held against the actual physical evidence, collapses under the weight of its own internal contradictions. What remains, after the practical theories have been set aside, is a more uncomfortable kind of question. The folklore of regions where Erdstalls are concentrated developed its own explanations long before archaeology arrived. Bavaria and Upper Austria have long traditions of belief in underground beings, like the Erdmandel. These gnome-like figures are associated with the earth itself, with spaces beneath farms and fields. They represent the ambiguous boundary between the human world and whatever lies beneath it. Local tradition attributes the tunnels directly to these beings. They were not made by humans. They were found by humans, existing habitations of something that had been there long before the farmsteads. This is the kind of attribution that rationalist historiography tends to dismiss and move past quickly. But it is worth pausing on, because folk traditions of this kind consistent, graphically specific. Deeply embedded in the daily life of agricultural communities, do not usually arise without some relationship to actual experience. The people who lived above these tunnels knew they were there. They had a relationship with them. And the nature of that relationship, as expressed in the stories they told about it, was not practical. It was not, "We built this for storage." It was something more like, "There is a world beneath our world, and it has inhabitants, and we are not entirely separate from them." The archaeological theory that has gained the most traction among serious researchers is related to this, though it arrives at similar territory by a different route. The proposal, developed in part by the German researcher Heinrich Kusch, who has surveyed hundreds of Erdstalls across Bavaria and Austria, is that the tunnels served a spiritual or ritual function connected to medieval folk religion. Operating beneath and alongside the official practices of the church, the specific hypothesis takes several forms. One suggests that Erdstalls were spaces of penance or purification, that passing through the tunnels, particularly through the Schlup, was understood as a form of symbolic death and rebirth, a literal enactment of passing through a threshold from one state of being to another. The physical experience of squeezing through a Schlup fit, the helplessness of it, the surrender required. The darkness on both sides, the complete inability to move quickly or escape, would have been a powerful somatic metaphor for dying. For relinquishing the self, for emerging on the other side, changed. Another variant suggests that the tunnels were understood as dwelling places for the souls of the dead, or as transitional spaces where the recently deceased could be housed. During the period between death and whatever came after, the chambers along the tunnels, just large enough to sit in, just large enough to contain a human presence, this reading gives them a different kind of logic. They were not built for the living to use as passages. They were built for something else to inhabit. Neither theory can be proven from the evidence available. Both have a quality that the practical explanations lack. They actually fit the design. The Schlup makes no sense in a storage cellar. It makes a particular kind of sense as a bottleneck between the world of the living and whatever the tunnel was understood to contain. There is a version of human history that lives entirely above ground in the monuments and texts and material culture that survived the surface. It is the version most of us were taught. It is a useful version as far as it goes. The Erdstalls are a reminder of how far it does not go. Beneath 2,000 fields and farmyards in the heart of medieval Europe, in an era that left behind cathedrals and chronicles, and illuminated manuscripts of extraordinary sophistication, ordinary people, farmers or craftspeople, were doing something in the dark that they never wrote down. They were carving narrow passages through bedrock with hand tools, cutting geometric openings that a body could barely pass through, making chambers in the earth that served no purpose legible to us from the outside. They were doing this across multiple countries, over multiple generations, in apparent coordination. And when they were done, or when whatever made them meaningful was no longer meaningful, they sealed the entrances or simply stopped visiting, and the tunnels waited in the dark without complaint. The ground kept the secret because the ground always keeps secrets. It is indifferent to our need to understand, our need to categorize and explain. It holds what it is given and returns it only when something breaks the surface. A fence post, a plow, a curious hand brushing earth away from an opening. An opening that has been waiting in the dark for 8 centuries. Whatever the Erdstalls were for, they were for something that mattered enough to justify enormous labor, sustained secrecy, and perfect silence in the record. Whatever humans were trying to do in those tunnels, they believed in it completely. The Schlupf is still there, in hundreds of surviving tunnels across Bavaria and Austria. The opening is still exactly the size it was cut to be 1,000 years ago. It still requires the same surrender. It still opens onto the same darkness on the other side. We still do not know what was waiting there. Thank you for spending this time with me on Whispered Chronicles, Echoes of Forgotten Lore. If stories like this resonate with you, stories that remind us how much of history still waits beneath the surface, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.